So Jeremiah, what's the first word that pops into your head? Probably something like doom, right? Or judgment. But what if I told you that smack in the middle of this super grim book, there's this incredible, surprising message of hope? Yeah, hope. Let's get into it.
For ages, people have called him the weeping prophet. And look, for good reason. His job was basically to tell everyone how bad things had gotten, a society just falling apart. But is that it? Is that the whole picture? Nah. Today, we're going to flip the script and look at Jeremiah, the prophet of hope.
Okay, first things first, let's get the context right. Jeremiah's mission, his whole reason for being there, was to announce judgment. And his language? Whoa, it was intense. We're talking about uprooting, tearing down, overthrowing an entire nation that had completely walked away from its promises. This was serious stuff, with very real, very severe consequences.
And listen, this was not some warning they could just ignore. This quote from Jeremiah, it's just bone-chillingly clear. This judgment was coming, and it was going to be relentless, unstoppable. I mean, the whole point was to shake people to their absolute core and make them realize, oh man, this is serious.
But then, right in the middle of all that darkness, we're talking chapters 30 to 33, we hit this section that's so completely different. Scholars actually call it the Book of Consolation. It's this massive pivot, right, from destruction to restoration. It's a message of hope planted smack dab in the middle of all the judgment. And it perfectly shows you the bigger picture, the full arc of what the prophets were trying to say.
So what's so cool about this when you break it down is that it follows this classic prophetic pattern. Step 1, sin. The people have broken the covenant. Step 2, repent. God calls them to turn back. Step 3, judgment. If you don't repent, this is what's coming. But here's the thing, we almost always stop there, right? We think judgment is the end of the line, but it's not. The whole point, the crucial step 4, is restoration. After everything is torn down, a rebuilding is coming. And get this, the entire book of Consolation is built around this amazing Hebrew phrase, shub shabut. It literally translates to restore the fortunes. See, there's a play on words here. The people had refused to shub, that is to return, to God. So God says, okay, if you won't return to me, I will shub shabut. He will be the one to act. He will be the one to restore everything.
So the big question is, how do you even talk about this kind of hope? How did prophets like Jeremiah actually get this message across? Well, they had two main tools in their toolbox, two different ways of painting a picture of what this salvation would look like. Let's break them down.
Okay, so on one side, you've got what's called a salvation oracle. Think of this as a direct promise from God saying, I'm coming to rescue you. Then on the other side, you have the salvation portrayal. This is more like a beautiful, poetic painting of what life is going to be like after the rescue. So one's the promise of what God will do, and the other is the vision of what it will look like when he's done.
Let's zoom in on the salvation oracle first. Imagine God speaking right into the middle of a total crisis. The message is super simple, but so powerful. Hey, fear not, I see you, I see how hopeless this looks, and I am stepping in. I'm going to deliver you. It's a promise designed to give you courage right when you feel like you have none left.
And Jeremiah gives us a perfect example. You have these people who are in exile, right? They're scattered, far from home. And God says to them, fear not, do not be dismayed. I will save you from far away. I mean, that's not some vague, fuzzy hope. That is a direct, pinpoint promise of rescue from a situation that looked absolutely impossible.
But to really feel the weight of that promise, you have to understand just how bad things were. I mean, listen to how the text describes their situation. It says their hurt is incurable. There's no medicine for your wound, no healing for you. It's basically a doctor giving a terminal diagnosis, but for an entire nation. It just doesn't get more hopeless than that. And then you get this unbelievable twist. Right after describing this incurable, hopeless wound, the text says, therefore. Now, you're totally expecting the next words to be the final nail in the coffin, right? More judgment. But instead, it's the exact opposite. It's what one scholar calls illogical grace. It's therefore, I will deal with your enemies. Therefore, I will restore your health and heal that wound you thought was incurable. It's a promise that makes absolutely no logical sense, and that's what makes it so powerful.
Okay, so that was the oracle. Now for that second tool, the salvation portrayal. If the oracle is the promise, I will rescue you, the portrayal is the dream of what comes after. It's this beautiful, poetic, sometimes even over-the-top vision of what the future is going to look like. Total peace, total prosperity. And this quote just nails it. Remember, Jeremiah is the weeping prophet, living with a weeping people. But this vision of the future, it's a complete 180. He says, I will turn their mourning into joy. All that sorrow, it's going to be replaced by gladness. It's a total emotional transformation.
And this is so important to get, this restoration, this hope. It's not just about, getting their land back or rebuilding Jerusalem. That's part of it, for sure. But the real goal, the ultimate point, is to heal the relationship that was broken in the first place, that fractured bond between God and his people.
Jeremiah uses a couple of really powerful metaphors to drive this home. First, he compares the relationship to a marriage. He describes the nation as an unfaithful wife, even a shameless prostitute. Pretty harsh, right? But then, through that same illogical grace we talked about, she's completely transformed. And God calls out, "Return, O virgin Israel." The one who is unfaithful is now seen as pure again. It's a radical transformation.
The second metaphor he uses is a parent and a child. The people were acting like these rebellious, faithless sons, like a stubborn calf that just refuses to be trained. But then, the consequences, the judgment finally gets through to them. It breaks their pride, and they finally come back, grieving and ashamed of what they'd done. And just like that, the family is put back together.
So, what's the big takeaway for us today? Why does any of this ancient stuff matter? Well, I think it's because it taps into this really deep truth about how we handle life. This tension between facing hard realities and still, somehow, holding on to hope for something new.
Look, at the end of the day, here's what Jeremiah shows us. You can't get to real, genuine hope by ignoring what's broken. You have to confront it. The judgment isn't the final chapter. It's the painful but necessary surgery that clears out the infection so that something even more powerful can happen, so that a real restoration can begin. A grace that, believe it or not, can heal even the wounds that seem completely incurable. And that really just leaves us with one last question to chew on, doesn't it? When we look at our world, which so often feels broken, or even just in our own lives when we're facing something that feels hopeless, maybe even incurable, where do we find our own version of that illogical hope? The kind of hope that promises, against all odds, to turn our deepest sorrow into real joy.